pleasure to be here in sunny Orlando from where I live in frigid New York City. And it's good to be in a student union that is going green. I understand there's a lot of exciting things happening with the technology of this very building that we're in today. Today we've seen the issue of climate and security from various angles. The Vice Admiral, Janet Larson, Joan, and James all spoke about it from different perspectives. But I feel there's a huge gap. And that is, what did Chiquitanos in the Bolivian rainforest think about the issue? And how about women in Rajasthan? And tribal leaders in Liberia? Let's put a human face on this conversation today. You know, I've spent the last decades around the world seeking pragmatic solutions to the issue of climate and poverty. And I've been on the ground in the developing country for most of that time. And I'm not ideological. I've learned that we can make enough money and live well around the world without spewing endless amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. What's emerged for me is a kind of a redefinition of prosperity. So this is a lunch talk, so I'll keep things somewhat autobiographical so you can relate to it. But I'll admit a doubt did cross my mind about this speech. I was wondering, would you really care about what I'm talking about today? I mean, after all, this is an advanced industrial nation, and I'm going to be talking about the developing world, very marginal, obscure places. But you know, an African chief once said to me, if you don't share your wealth with us, we will share our poverty with you. And this has never been more true than with the issue of climate change. Because now we have climate refugees and deadly climate-induced diseases spreading across borders, affecting our security. So around the world, in Africa, Latin America, Asia, people mostly want and love similar things, like family, freedom, security, and fun. But over the years, I've seen the devastating effects of globalization and climate change in the developing world. Their food and water security is compromised. They're getting sick more. And their coastal boundaries are disappearing. Yet they didn't cause it. A US citizen emits as much carbon in a single year as an Ethiopian does in his lifetime. And the world's 50 poorest countries, as you may have heard, only cause 1% of climate change. And they're, of course, hit the very hardest. But I'm not talking about more handouts. We all know it's a recession. There's a global meltdown. And everyone, here and over there, has the desire to develop. But it can only be done by working toward a smarter economy. I often ask myself when I get up in the morning, you know, what are the seeds and the sparks out there? So I'll show you some of these seeds and these sparks that are growing and igniting in different places in the world through 3 case studies, starting in Charles Taylor's Liberia. Now, when I arrived in Liberia in the spring of 1999, I was fresh out of graduate school at Georgetown. And they sent me over there to head up programs for a huge international relief program, CRS. So suddenly I had 150 people working under me and 5 offices in this huge program. We had 24-hour-a-day radio contact, so very little sleep during that time. They told me when I took the job that the Civil War is over. Don't worry, it's a 7-year Civil War. People are laughing. Maybe they've read my book. But this was the view from my office window. The 7-year Civil War in Liberia is now called its 14-year Civil War, and I'd arrived in the very middle. This is Randall Street and UN Drive. And there were child soldiers, of course, you know, including women. And it was very dramatic, shocking, and anarchic, kind of like Robert Kaplan's article that I read in grad school, The Coming Anarchy, where he talks about how these issues are a threat. This is Liberia. I'm sure most of you know, but just I thought I'd show you where it is, between Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Ivory Coast in Western Africa. At the time that I was there, this man, Charles Taylor, otherwise known as Dr. Charles Gankani Doc Pana Taylor, he was the Zoe of Zoes, the chief witch doctor of the country. That's why he's got that little baton there. He drank human blood and actually participated in human intestine roadblocks in Liberia, where they take a human intestine and stop the cars behind it. This was a bad person. He's on trial now in The Hague for war crimes, including sexual slavery. I used to be terrified every time his convoy would drive by my house with all the soldiers. And he was destabilizing not only Liberia, but the whole West African sub-region. Many of you have heard about conflict diamonds. And of course, there was dire environmental impacts to those diamonds, including amputations. But there was also blood timber. And this was the biggest thing in Liberia. When I was there, Oriental Timber Company, a Singapore-based company, was taking out systematically Liberia's rainforests along with Charles Taylor. They were bringing in guns and weapons to Charles, and he was shipping out timber for Asian markets. Some of it was transported to the US after that. These are some of the images. You can see that Liberia, of course, has some of the Upper Ghanaian rainforest's highest biodiversity. It's like 40% of that region is still in virgin rainforest. So it's a gold mine. And part of this war, of course, was a war of globalization and natural resources, the kind of wars that we'll expect to see under climate change scenarios. So I remember one day looking out over one of these clear cuts, because I used to travel into the jungles a lot, and just seeing this clear cut all the way to the horizon. And OTC had their own military faction, just like Taylor. And they were controlling the country along with him. So I was, during all this time, delivering food. I mean, we had this big food pipeline. So the food would come in on ships like this. And not only did I have 150 professional staff, but we had 1,000 casual workers that would carry it. And it was shipped out to people on the brink of starvation. These are some of the people, and of course it felt good to be serving people who are really needing it, with corn, soy blends, bulgur wheats, rice, US government surplus commodities. And at the same time, when I was doing this, I also felt rather hopeless. It just seemed like, what can you really do? I mean, I had to hunker down once in Buchanan when the skirmishes started in Monrovia. I was held at gunpoint by a child soldier in the southeast. And there were things that I can't even discuss right here. I wrote this book called Blue Clay People. And it's a kind of a coming-of-age memoir, but I talk about environmental scarcity and how it leads to a cultural and racial clash, which leads to war. And how in West Africa, demographic, environmental, and societal stress lead to criminal anarchy that can slip into war. But then the conflict hit a lull after a while, and suddenly, I looked around. I was working so much I hardly even noticed that I was living in America in Africa. Liberia is America in Africa. That's their flag. It's very similar to ours. That Liberian gentleman there is holding up a picture of James Monroe, who founded the American Colonization Society in the early 1800s that founded Liberia. And Monrovia was named after him. They love James Monroe over there. That's the First Baptist Church in Liberia. Our former slaves, of course, it was a Democratic and Republican initiative. The Democrats wanted to give them a chance to go back to Africa, and Republicans kind of wanted to get them out, sorry, or the conservatives and liberals, let's just say, at the time, not Republicans and Democrats. But they were able to do that. And there's just this life around me in Liberia that I started to notice. And I realized that, there's a real humanity. So these people, even during a war, were creating all kinds of inspiring models of how to live sustainably, partially because they saw the effects of this natural resource war. For one thing that they were doing is they were making eco-stoves. This is Tommy Garnett, a friend of mine, an inspiring Sierra Leonean man. I worked in Sierra Leone for a while as well. He worked in the Liberian refugee camps in Sierra Leone. So there were, like 1 million displaced people from Liberia during the conflict. And while they were in the camps, this gentleman taught them how to use these eco-stoves. These eco-stoves, you use about 1/4 as much wood to heat your food. So suddenly, tens of thousands of hectares of rainforest were being conserved because people weren't cutting down the wood. They could use these eco-stoves. As you can see, they're very simple technologies. It's just clay into a mold, and it captures the heat inside instead of just an open pit fire, which is what everyone uses over there. Now, not only that, but Liberians were, and this is actually not the full photo, but if we have the full photo, you can see that he's putting a barcode on the trees. Now, when I went back to Liberia beginning of last year, everything had changed. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first woman president of Africa, is the president now. There's law and order. Her executive order number 1 was to cancel all blood diamond contracts, all timber contracts, and put an amnesty, a ban on all timber. And they set up a process. And I was participating. I was sent over there with a UN agency to negotiate the agreement between the European Union, Liberian civil society, and business. And what we tried to do was bring everyone to the table to figure out, okay, how are we going to have sustainable timber in this country? And because Europe is actually insisting that they only buy sustainable procured timber, there's a huge demand for it, but there's no supply. There's very little certified supply, so that's what we did. And now, even according to a liberal watchdog like Global Witness, only 3 logs have left Liberia outside of the system. Just 3. So everything is sustainable. It's a model for Africa. It's progressive. And it's because Liberians wanted to do it, and it's generating more income for them because they get a premium price for sustainable timber, more than what they get otherwise. And the Europeans know that what they're buying is actually sustainable. So it was an exciting change in Liberia. When I finished up there, I actually was transferred to Bolivia. Bolivia is a landlocked nation in South America. And when I got there, I saw 3 problems right out my window. The first one was this kind of vicious cycle of natural resource destruction and poverty. These are some folks out in the Amazon. Bolivia is like 70% Amazon. And the second thing that I saw was, if this will work, widespread corporate destruction of the rainforest. Archer Daniel Midlands was one of the companies down there planting huge soy plantations for first world soy consumption. There was also Mennonites had huge extensions, and Brazilian companies also for biofuels and other products. So just this massive amount of impact. And then, of course, I looked out my window, and Mount Eudaimonia, the glacier, was melting. Thank you very much. And if you don't believe that, I went up to go skiing. I love to ski. I grew up skiing. And would you believe that there was nowhere to ski? This is the time exposure of Mount Chacaltaya, right above my apartment there. It's the only ski resort in Bolivia. Now there are 0 ski resorts because it's just a wasteland. This destruction of the glaciers in Bolivia affects 2 million people's water supply. A lot of them are some of the poorest people on earth in El Alto slums. So when I saw this, I said, I really just can't continue to do business as usual. So I quit my job with CRS, and I went to work on an innovative project in the Bolivian Amazon. I actually took a salary cut. I went to work with a local NGO. And the idea that we were pursuing was carbon ranching. What is carbon ranching? Well, the idea is kind of simple. You put a price on the rainforest as it is. You internalize the externality of climate change by keeping the rainforest. Rainforests, of course, cause 20% of global warming. That's the 3rd biggest source after coal and oil, and it's more than all of China's pollution slurred, all of China's pollution put together, or all the world's transport sector. So if you can keep the rainforest standing, you're doing a lot to slow global warming. So what we did was the Nature Conservancy was doing this with 3 companies, BP, AEP, and Pacific Corps, and with the Friends of Nature Foundation where I worked, we were trying to conserve this big area. This is a beautiful waterfall. There's 20 of these waterfalls in the area, gushing into virgin rainforests off the Huanchaca Plateau, and bought out 5 logging concessions, terminated them, that would have been logged, something like 1.5 million acres. That was turned back over to Mother Nature to keep the carbon locked up securely. And the companies, as the Vice Admiral hinted at earlier, got credit on the Chicago Climate Exchange for reducing some of their pollution. It's a voluntary market at this point. So it was exciting because suddenly we were able to take that yellow area. You can see on the small map of Bolivia in the left, there's a yellow area that points up. That yellow area became the carbon zone. And that would have been cut down, but now it was expanded and secured. Part of the money from the companies went to Park Service in Bolivia to help protect the area. Other went into community development projects and so on. But there was a problem. And the problem was that the people were not included early enough in this process. and they didn't see the benefits. There were thousands of Chiquitano Indians living around it, as well as the very last Wadasue people. They were about to go into extinction. I met the final Wadasue speaker. And of course, the Chiquitanos saw the Wadasues, what happened to them, and they didn't want the same thing to happen. And they saw this as an opportunity. They knew that they could link up with multinational companies in the US and Europe to get around a corrupt local bureaucracy, corrupt local third world government, and create this global model. What we did was we went out to the Amazon and we talked with these people, at length, and we figured out how can they make money off of this, how can they get involved. Some of them started measuring the trees to make sure that the carbon was actually being sequestered. It's part of a big process monitored by international monitors. Others became park guards. Some of the former indigenous people could guard the park and make money in that way. In fact, more than half of the park guards are from the area. And most importantly of all, we fought for a long time to get them an indigenous territory. Now that yellow area outside the carbon zone, the 3 million acre Amazon area, is their territory forever. They got that. They'd been fighting for it for a long time, maybe hundreds of years since Spanish times, but only because of this type of project did they get it. And the proof that this actually worked, to be honest, is that it's still there. You can go down to Bolivia. In fact, I'm going down to Bolivia, and you will see that the people live in this area happily. They're doing sustainable logging in their area. They're doing ecotourism for tourists. And the forest is still there. So I wrote a book about this called Whispering in the Giant's Ear, which looked at this project, but also Bolivia's war on globalization. You know how in some ways they're trying to have an alternative insertion into the global economy in a way that protects their culture and secures their environments. And just in parentheses, the whole coincides curve, the environmental coincides curve, that you have to be rich to be green is not true. I think that so many of my experiences around the world prove that conservation is not a full belly phenomenon. You're not too poor to be green. And in fact, some of the most inspiring environmental leaders I've seen have been in the third world. So the final thing I'll say about this, before moving on to my last case study, is that, this is scalable. It's not just some little thing we did in the Amazon in Bolivia. This actually is going to scale right now as we speak. In the Waxman-Markey bill, it's an important issue. I've been working on getting it in there. It's in the Copenhagen Accords. I went last month to a high-level meeting at the UN. There were presidents, prime ministers there. Everyone supports the idea. The Secretary General, Moon, was there. It's called RED now, Reduced Emissions Through Deforestation and Land Degradation. But it's carbon ranching. It's the same thing. And the project we worked on in Bolivia is a prototype. It's been criticized by a Greenpeace report recently and so on. But I think there are some problems, but they can be worked with, and it is a good model. So, and what it shows in the end of the day is that it is possible to weave healthy new fibers into the global economy. I served on a World Bank mission to India, and I got lost in a Jaipur market. And I'll tell you, I just felt like I was about to faint. The swirl of people and just the smells, and like I felt pressed in on. I almost fainted, and I definitely couldn't find my hotel for a long time. And what I started to ask myself is, can the world stand up to so much population pressure? But then I traveled to Rajasthan, and I saw some of the solar initiatives. Rajasthan is on course to become one of the largest producers of solar energy in the world. They bask in an average of 320 days of sunshine a year, and they can produce up to 6.4 kilowatts per hour per square meter, which is one of the highest in the world. So they've just declared, or they'll soon be declaring, a 15,000 kilometer solar zone for this area. Now, this kind of change doesn't come out of nowhere, right? It comes, I think, in some ways out of people's environmental movements in India that have been pushing for change. You've probably heard about the tree huggers, or the Chipko movement. Chipko means to cling. And these women, I hope you can see it in the back, but they would literally cling to trees. They'd hug them, not only to prevent the loggers from cutting them down, but also as kind of a spiritual practice. This inspired gentlemen like this guy, Mr. Dutta, who's a prominent Indian environmentalist, and he's forced the government to implement a 15-year-old cars off the road rule. He said, quote, "I thought that instead of demanding and protesting, we could do better justice to the issues by becoming a part of the decision-making process." So there was big changes in India. So what are we to take away from these case studies? I would suggest three things. First, we can change, even though it's difficult. This is a big global problem, but we can change in partnership with the developing world. Whether it's solar in India, forest carbon in Bolivia, or certified timber in Liberia. In Copenhagen, we can push for strong, robust policies. Now, even if you're not going over there, as I'll be going over there, there's things that you can do right here. There's a group called 350.org, which is a global citizens movement of hundreds of thousands of people that are just saying, look, leaders, we don't want to go above 350 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's the limit. And the IPCC agrees with that, and many other scientists that I respect. We can also work toward the green economy right here, not just by doing what you've done here in terms of the student union, but also pressuring for carbon ranching globally. And by voting with your dollars, use those use mugs that are reusable, purchase sustainable products, and so on. Every dollar counts in that direction. Second, we can reimagine development. I had a bit of a culture shock, I'll admit, when I came back from the country after so many years abroad. I came back home, and I saw the US with fresh eyes. And I felt a bit disoriented by what I saw as hyper-consumption or kind of overdevelopment. This probably looks familiar, right? This type of planning and development. This is what was causing Bolivia's glaciers to melt and rainforests to be destroyed, was this type of a lifestyle. And what I did was I actually ended up, believe it or not, living in this 12 by 12 house for 6 weeks. When I got back, it's owned by an inspiring physician from North Carolina named Ashley. And she was traveling for 6 weeks, and she asked me to tiny house sit for her. So I stayed in this little house, and I'm from New York City, and it's different for me at first, but I'll tell you, I learned a lot living there for those 6 weeks. I learned a lot about how she lives on a $12,000 a year salary. This lady gives the rest back to the hospital because she's growing her own food. She's pursuing a kind of a Jeffersonian freeholder idea that we can do things ourselves. We don't need big programs. And she's trying to live as if there were only one planet per American, like what Janet was talking about, how our impact right now, our consumption patterns are above what the planet can hold, so she was trying to scale back. And I also met some of her neighbors. And they were, well, these are not her neighbors, well, these were her neighbors, yes. This is how they were producing chickens, like free-range chickens. These were permaculturists and biodiesel brewers and wild crafters and people on the creative edge of how to live on the margins of US society. Of course, this was up the road from the 12 by 12. I got to go into one of the chicken factories and saw how that's produced. And what was remarkable was that how, the way humans look in those factories is similar to how the chickens look. You see what I mean? So I was a bit inspired by it. This is the typical type of farm that I saw there in the area. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that we need to go back and live in caves and eat roots and berries. But many people around the country are asking themselves if sometimes in the name of development, we punish people for living sustainably. Is higher GDP always the fix? What are the underlying values that lead to what the Greek philosophers called Eudaimonia, or the best life? I think there's a sweet spot between hyperconsumption and just destitution. And this sweet spot is what I call the elusive contours of enough. Finally, and in conclusion, we can achieve climate justice. This is Ursula on the bottom there. I met her at the United Nations last month. Her island in Papua New Guinea is going underwater as sea levels rise. But Ursula has pressured the government there to relocate her people to safer, higher ground. You can see that their island is going down. And she's fought for a protected marine reserve so her people can earn their living by fishing long into the future. So the world is warming. It's going to change, and change will not always be easy. But we can change. Humanity has brought about the end of colonialism, slavery, and so many other injustices. We can handle climate change, but not alone. We need to do it with Ursula, with Tommy Garnett, with Mr. Dutza, with Salvador from Bolivia, and countless others, with our brothers and sisters throughout the world. Thank you very much.